And now I'd like Amanda to just give us a little bit more information about the work that Wegner does with nonprofit organizations.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Teresa, for giving that wonderful introduction. As Teresa mentioned, my name is Amanda VanNatta. I'm a senior manager specializing in not-for-profit tax services at Wegner. We predominantly, we have a lot of nonprofit clients. More than 40% of our practice is nonprofit services. We do both auditing services. We also help with the tax preparation and submission to the IRS every year. We have been around for 6 decades now, and we have over 700 nonprofit clients in a variety of sectors, including unions, associations. We work with publicly supported nonprofits. And we have clients not only in Wisconsin and Minnesota and in the Midwest, but also nationwide and internationally. So our offices are based in Wisconsin, New York, and Washington, D.C. And that's a little bit more about us.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. And Dave, can you tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing with Webster, Chamberlain, and Bean?
Absolutely. We bill ourselves as the nation's oldest, largest firm representing tax-exempt organizations. That is all we do. We're a unique firm just for the tax-exempt community. We're full service. We do corporate tax, intellectual property, government relations, transactional work. We work with the board. We're doing governance, you name it, soup to nuts, just like the big New York City firm is for profits.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dave. And again, I just wanted to say that I'm Teresa Slemmy. I work with your part-time controller as a director in the Washington, D.C. office. I wanted to give a warm welcome to any of our clients that may be joining us today on the webinar. And for those of you who don't know about your part-time controller, we are a firm of accountants, controllers, and CFOs that work exclusively with nonprofit clients. We have over 700 clients of all shapes and sizes. And while we have 7 physical locations, we're currently working with all of our clients remotely right now, so we can help clients all over the country. And our over 200 staff are dedicated and pride themselves on working with nonprofit organizations and the relationships that we build there. So if you are interested in more information on us, please visit us at yptc.com or send us an email at hello@yptc.com. We have just a couple of housekeeping items before we start. I will be moderating, so if you all have any questions during the webinar, please put them into the Q&A box and we will get to them either during the webinar or at the end. During the webinar, we can see you, or you can see us, sorry, but we can't see you, and this will be recorded. So if you're on the webinar, you're going to receive an email with the materials from this webinar, which will include both the slides and the IRS's election year activities and the prohibition on political campaign intervention for 501c3 organizations. During this webinar, we're going to go over some definition of terms to make sure everyone understands how the IRS defines them. We're going to review activities that are either allowable and unallowable or prohibited. We're going to review some specific issues that different types of nonprofit organizations might face. And we're also going to go over the red flags so your organization can remain compliant within the guidelines. And lastly, we're going to summarize some of those repercussions if you do fall outside those guidelines. All right. So initially, we'd like to start with a quick poll question. We'd love to get a sense of who is on the webinar today and what kind of organization you're working with. So if everyone could just take a moment and please fill that out. All right, excellent. It looks like the vast majority of participants are 501c3 organizations. That's great to know as we go into the next section. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda. Thank you.
All right, everyone. So Our goal today is to have just a really good conversation about political do's and don'ts. So I'm going to kick things off by just giving some definitions of kind of some of the key terms that we're going to talk about throughout our presentation. And then, you know, Dave and I have some questions that we had already had submitted from attendees that we're going to work on addressing throughout the presentation. But if any of this kind of spurs a question in your mind, please put it in the question and answer function. We want this to be as conversational as it can be, because we want to address your questions when it comes to political campaigning and lobbying and grassroots and advocacy and all kinds of other activities that you might be involved in. So some of our key terms we're going to talk about today. Political campaign activities. So those are all activities that directly support or oppose candidates for either federal, state, local, public office. It does not matter whether or not your candidate is elected. If a candidate puts themselves out there, or if a person puts themselves out there as a candidate, and you support or oppose them, that is a political campaign activity. Political campaign activity is not is an activity that encourages participation, the get out the vote activities organizations might do, any voter registration or education, provided that those activities don't ultimately support or oppose any candidates for public office. I should be very clear about this. 501c3 organizations are not allowed to participate in any political campaign activities. While some of the activities mentioned in the second paragraph, like get out the vote campaigns or voter education, is admissible to a 501c3 organization, you can absolutely not participate in the political process, which we will talk about more throughout the presentation. Teresa, can you go to the next slide?
Well, actually, if I real quick, because one of the questions hit upon this, and one of the questions that we received dealt with whether or not an individual can publicly favor one party over another. Mm-hmm. And I just want to make the clarifying point that although the definition here is correct, it shouldn't be taken so literal. All activities that support or oppose candidates, that also, in our opinion, applies to their party. So, yep. For example, if the minister at your church were to advocate supporting a political party's candidates, for example, you should vote Republican because they are pro-life. It's our opinion that's the equivalent to supporting or opposing a candidate, because in most cases, when it comes down to the election, you're going to have a candidate from one party against another candidate, and even if it's even if you have a libertarian on the ballot, and essentially by saying vote Republican, you are advocating or supporting that candidate, and also then implicitly opposing the others. So it can be party specific.
Right, and we will send out at the end of this presentation some reminders that the IRS they put out actually in the date on it is a long time ago, 2006, 2007, I believe. But it was during a political cycle that in the last election cycle before this was released, the IRS had a lot of compliance issues. And so the reminders that are included in the document that we'll send out after our presentation are walk through exactly what Dave said and support everything when it comes to the party affiliations too. The other things organizations have to be careful about, and Dave, chime in as you'd like, is if you are doing voter education activities, it's really easy to start crossing a line from advocacy or education into politicking. If you put out, a brochure that is going to outline a bunch of different platforms of candidates that are running for public office as an education tool, but then you make known what positions your organization takes, depending on how that pamphlet is written, it could be construed to have crossed the line into politicking. So you have to be really careful about your activities, especially during election cycles. as a C3. Because I mean, I think in my opinion, the easiest way to lose your tax-exempt 501c3 status is to get involved in politicking when you should not be.
And since we're on this, instead of just leaping forward, maybe let's talk about that, because I think in terms of the history of this, it might benefit folks because it's been an interesting evolution with tax-exempt organizations. Because prior to the overhaul of the Internal Revenue Code in 1954, C3 organizations actually could engage in incidental political activity without jeopardizing their exemption, just as long as they were otherwise pursuing their principal purpose. Now, interesting aside, George Webster, the founder of my firm, was involved in the rewrite of the tax code representing tax exempts. And the story is, back then Senate Minority Leader Lyndon Johnson offered a floor amendment to the legislation, to the rewrite of the code, adding the prohibition that is now quoted in 501c3. Now, since it was added on the floor, there's no legislative history that goes along with it, but it has been reliably, it's funny, it's been reliably reported that Senator Johnson was angry at members of the Bass family, a politically connected family back then, who had used several charities they controlled to oppose his election in 1948.
Yeah, and so that's exactly, it's the Johnson Amendment that allows you not to do politicking as a 501c3. One of the things that I like to talk about, Dave, and maybe you can, I mean, this is just a little of an aside, but my understanding is constantly on the floor, there's actively some kind of, they're trying to weaken the Johnson Amendment. There's some legislators that are out there that are trying to weaken the Johnson Amendment, that want to allow for more politicking in 501c3 organizations to get rid of the complete prohibition. And so, you know, in my opinion, the Johnson Amendment is excellent because it allows a public charity to stay unbiased, but just, you know, an understanding that there is constant kind of attack on this prohibition.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, unlike the restriction on lobbying, if you look at the statutory language, it is an absolute prohibition on political activity. But it seems from our experience, and again, I'm a lawyer, I can't advise anyone to break the law, but this is why we're on this call, is to understand the nuance of it. I've always said there's no such thing as law, it's all suggestion, and facts and circumstances change that. But historically, in my 30 years of practicing, the IRS has rarely revoked exemptions for prohibited political activity, particularly when it comes to church involvement. In the mid-90s, there were ministers from several churches in the Tidewater area around Norfolk, Virginia, and they are actually complaining publicly after being visited by the IRS these agents just came to merely explain the rules prohibiting political activity. There was never any opening of an audit to revoke the church's exemptions. And in fact, and I think this may be what you were talking about, Amanda, but the February 2006, the IRS released a report, Political Activity Compliance Initiative. And that report indicated that from 2004 to 2006, they identified 59 cases of, quote, improper political activity occurring. So 59 different organizations, 37 churches, and 22 other organizations, 22 other C3s. The revocation was not proposed against any of the churches, and it was only proposed against 3 of the non-church charities. It's interesting. So it is an absolute bar by the way it's statutorily written, but I think maybe the reticence to litigate is as a result in part of the First Amendment grounds and the facts and circumstances. We were about 12 years ago, we were involved in this one audit with a medical membership association, which is, they were exempt under C3, and they were audited, and they had taken up these billboards that every year were in place that were dealing with Medicare reimbursement rates. And the billboards thanked certain legislators for supporting their position. And the IRS, I guess they made a mistake because they determined that those ads, when published in a non-election year, were not campaign intervention, but in an election year, the exact same ads, the same billboards published in an election year were campaign intervention. And then this organization protested the proposed excise tax. They claimed that they weren't campaign intervention based on the facts and circumstances. And for anyone out there taking notes, those are in Revenue Ruling 2004-6, and that the IRS was inconsistently treating the legislators as non-candidates in one year and candidates in the next, and that there was vagueness in the law. A year later, the IRS notified the exempt organization to determine the ads were not campaign intervention and the audit was being closed. So it's kind of funny. You know, the only clear example of enforcement in this regard goes back to, and this is one of the most widely known, is the 1992 case against the Church of Pierce Creek, when Bill Clinton was running, and that church took out a full-page ad in USA Today and in the Washington Times that highlighted Mr. Clinton's support for abortion, civil rights for homosexuals, distribution of condoms in high schools. And then the ad specifically asked, how then can we, you know, Christians vote for Bill Clinton? Mm-hmm. And the church's ad did not tell anyone reading it to vote for then George H.W. Bush, the president, or Ross Perot. But it just specifically said that. Also interestingly, as an aside, the ad at the bottom stated, your tax-deductible contributions for this advertisement are gladly accepted, which it's clearly not. But you know, despite the usual reticence to act, that organization, that church's exemption was revoked in 1995, and that went all the way up to the United States Court of Appeals, and they upheld that. So there's, I'm not advocating people take activity and wade into the political arena, but the IRS has not had a consistent stellar record in enforcement.
Well, and I think that's what's hard about these kind of activities is, you know, depending on the time, your agent, everything, you can take the same set of circumstances and it might be looked at in different manners. And so one of the things, Dave, that you had mentioned is, you know, your First Amendment right, so your right to free speech. And a few of our questions that have already come up have been about whether employees, board members, leaders of an organization can make their personal feelings on political issues known. And so maybe we should address that right now, because yes, they can. You're allowed to have your own private thoughts and beliefs. You're allowed to, you know, if you've got a social media account, you can certainly share those beliefs on a social platform. The really important thing to cover when you are a leader of an organization, though, and you might be construed as the voice of an organization, is to ensure that when you are giving your opinion on something, that you make it very clear in your statement that this is my personal opinion. This does not represent the opinions of XYZ organization that I work with. And that's kind of one of the ways that we can ensure that that the organization is protected, is to be, you know, to make clear in editorial pieces that might be written, in any statements that are being made on any social media platforms, that there is language there that indicates that it's your personal belief. It is not the opinion of the organization for which you work. And one of the pre-questions we got too was about what can we prohibit perhaps our employees from doing. And I don't think it's prohibiting employees from sharing their opinions, but it's to make clear to them kind of any statement that they would make to ensure that it is linked to their, this is my individual opinion as an individual, it is not the opinion of my organization. And to make sure that, you know, they're not posting or linking it to your organizational page. Do you have anything to add there, Dave?
Yeah, just so, and that's absolutely correct. Obviously, you have your own ability to express yourself. Where we have seen organizations, however, get in trouble is less the action of the individual, i.e. they were, in fact, acting in their own capacity, not as an agent of the organization, but it's the thereafter when there's some tacit support by the organization. So, you know, the service will argue that the organization ratified those actions. So CEO or whomever acts as an individual, and then you know, in some other questioning, the chair of the board, acting as the chair of the board, being identified as the chair of the board, says, yeah, we think what Jane said was great, and you know, that's our belief, you know, and pronouns are important. So that's something you have to be careful on. The issue about what you can prohibit people from doing actually then touches on another area of the law that we didn't advertise here, but I'll address it since it's part and parcel of it, and that's employment law. Because organizations will often, you know, try and, you know, based on ideologically, you know, their issues or what have you, to curb what people say. And all I can say is that's something that is addressed under federal law. There's a lot of anti-discrimination, and religion's a protected one. There are issues that are all you gotta do is turn on the TV today in the media. There are issues that deal with gender, that deal with race, what have you. Prohibiting people from saying things could be a form of discrimination. So you do have the federal laws, as well as you need to look at your state laws. It probably should come as no surprise that in the District of Columbia, there's a separate area of discrimination. You cannot, by statute, discriminate. You cannot discriminate against someone based on their party affiliation, whatever political party they support. And you know, just one anecdotal story. You know, 2 years ago, an organization I represent had to defend in a lawsuit, and part of the claim was that, you know, the individual, the former employee who was terminated, had a Trump bobblehead on their desk, and they said that they were criticized for that, i.e., that fits exactly into this statute. They were being criticized for their political party, their support. Now, whether or not it factored into the determination for termination is a different issue, but you have to be very, very cautious in terms of what you mandate your employees do or don't do on their own.
Well, we could continue to go on about political campaign activities, but let's go through a few more definitions, because then we can kind of expand our discussion here a little bit. So as we made clear, politicking for 501c3s is absolutely prohibited. C4s are in the same boat. Other kinds of organizations are allowed to do some activities when it comes to politicking. Lobbying activities, however, for 501c3 organizations are allowable activities. And those are activities that intend to influence foreign, national, state, or local legislation. You might be doing direct lobbying where you're talking to your legislators. There's maybe a bill of legislation you'd like to see passed. You're going to meet and discuss how it would benefit your organization. Or grassroots activities, which is more trying to talk to the public about perhaps a piece of legislation that's coming to the floor, either, you know, federally or at your state or local level, and encouraging people to support your position on that kind of legislation. So lobbying activities are allowed for 501c3 organizations within certain limits. It cannot be the primary purpose of your organization to conduct lobbying activities. Yep, go ahead.
Just to expand upon that, because this definition of lobbying activities, that is the lobbying definition under the Internal Revenue Code. There are other definitions for lobbying. You have to be aware of this. The Lobbying Disclosure Act, which is a federal law, which is enforced by the Federal Election Commission, and through the House of Representatives, and where you have to register, has a different, slightly different definition that is both in some regards broader and in others more narrowly tailored. The Lobbying Disclosure Act doesn't just include influencing legislation, it also includes Senate confirmations. So if there's a nomination for an individual for Senate confirmation and an organization engages on that, that is under the LDA considered lobbying activity. So that's where it is broader. But the LDA, interestingly, is narrower in that it does not include grassroots lobbying. It is only direct lobbying, i.e. the contact you make with a covered individual to then influence either the legislation or the Senate confirmation.
It's always fun to look at the different definitions, because even like is the lobbying definition, Dave, the same across all states, or can it also differ depending on what state you're operating in as well?
It will depend on there. That's why. So you have the federal, and then you have 51 or 50 states, and just Columbia have their own terminology and definition. Now, I would say that from my experience at the state level, they are all pretty uniform, but it gets more complicated in terms of how you can fund it. And that's really where the biggest differential is. Some states, you can use as much corporate money in your activities, and others it's verboten, just like with federal.
And then just a third definition, advocacy. So advocacy is the process of letting stakeholders make their voices heard on issues that are important to an organization at the local, state, and national level. It means helping policymakers to find specific solutions to persistent problems. And most nonprofits can and do engage in as much advocacy as possible to achieve their goals, right? The goal of every nonprofit organization, especially 501c3 organizations that are dealing with certain problems, is to find the solution to that problem so your organization no longer has to exist, right? We're dealing with trying to find affordable housing solutions. Well, ultimately, we want to find so many solutions that we don't have to exist anymore as an affordable housing organization. So advocacy is allowable. But there is this line, while all lobbying would be advocacy, not all advocacy is lobbying. So you might have, a leader of your organization be considered an expert in the area in which you're operating. And perhaps they're being brought in to talk to some legislators about solutions to the problem the organization is trying to solve, because they're subject matter experts. That's not lobbying. You're not trying to advocate for a position. You're just being an expert in your field. So advocacy is something that's allowable. So here are some examples of the difference between advocacy and lobbying that we can talk through and discuss. And one of the things I did want to talk about, because we do have another question in our question and answer section, but so when we talk about grassroots and lobbying activities, being a 501c3, we said you're allowed to do those activities within certain limits. Most people, what they do is they just kind of try to accumulate what expenditures they are incurring for lobbying and grassroots expenditures throughout their year. And then they're going to report those expenditures on Schedule C of their Form 990. For organizations, though, that know, 501c3s in particular, that know that they're going to have maybe more activity in lobbying or grassroots than a typical organization would have, you can actually file an election called a 501H election, which then puts you kind of into this 4-year test period to say, what are the allowable expenditures of our organization in these sectors based on our total expenses for the year. So what is the maximum that we can expend before we would incur some excess tax, basically, on any expenditures over that limit? Most organizations I see don't choose to do the 501H election just because their expenditures are generally pretty small in relation to total expenditures of their organization. But Dave, do you want to give any kind of insight as to when it might be a good idea to file that kind of election?
Well, see, and generally I am fairly risk adverse in my advice to clients. So sort of to back it up, Section 501c3 says that any lobbying activity cannot be a substantial amount of that organization's purposes and mission and activity. And I've always had a problem. So you can only lobby to an insubstantial amount.
Mm-hmm.
And
define what that is.
Exactly. And any lawyer or anyone, any advisor who tells you, oh, it's 5%, it's 10%, it's 15%, I don't believe, my opinion, is being necessarily honest with you. The IRS has purposefully avoided setting any bright line, and that's what you need to know. So I apologize if this is a long-winded answer, but to me, if an organization is going to undertake a sustained lobbying effort, no matter how insignificant, my opinion is, and one of the questions was, how do you make the 501H election? And that is Form 5768. You can download it off the web, but you fill out Form 5768. But if you were going, if you're asked a question, or if you spend a week on an issue, okay, you don't file your H election. But if you see an issue that is important to your organization, then that's, again, it's not how much, it's the frequency. If you see this as part of your basket of services and approach to, fulfilling your mission, then I would make the H election. And, anticipating, I'm not sure if this was one of the questions, but, anecdotally from what we have seen, and other, I believe, law firms and folks that have looked at this report the same thing. Making the H election is not a red or even a yellow flag for an audit. We have not seen in our client base any uptick that, oh, you made the H election, therefore now you're going to get audited. That's just not the case. Just like any other organization, you're going to fill out your returns and you're going to file them, and they'll all get processed the same way. And if there are inconsistencies obviously reported, that's where most likely your audit's going to crop up, or if it's randomly selected. But we have not seen that there is this big uptick for making the H election. So getting back to Amanda's inquiry, I think it's a smart thing, not based on percentage of activity, but the frequency. If it's going to be part of what you're doing, make the election.
Another important thing to say is once you do make the 501H election, it is in place until you revoke that election. So if you're filling out a tax return, even if you expended no money during the year on those kinds of activities, a Schedule C will be required to be filed for your organization. It's also something you should provide to your auditors and your tax preparers so that we just have that, the election on file, because it's important part of your tax filing then annually going forward.
And to that, in my opinion, you make the election, and again, this is a conscious decision. It means you as a C3 organization want to lobby. I think the 501H election is surprisingly generous based on the formula. Again, insubstantial to me, if you were going by that terminology, would be very, very minimal. Mm-hmm. But for an organization, this is part of the formula, for an organization that's their exempt purposes expenditures are $500,000, they can spend up to 20% of that on lobbying. That's pretty substantial to me. And it goes up from there. 500,000 to $1 million in exempt purpose expenditures, you get to spend $100,000 plus 15% of your EPE over 500, and it incrementally goes up from there. So I actually see the H election as being a wonderful, valuable tool that provides you certainty, and in my mind, a threshold much higher than I think anyone would reasonably say if you were going by the substantiality test.
And actually, for the first time in my practice this year, I encountered an organization that had overspent, that had to pay their an excess tax on expenditures over their allowable amount, which I will say is a pretty hefty excise tax, 25% of total expenditures. So, but it is something to keep an eye on, and it could be a good tool for an organization, especially if you find you are expending more than you should every year. Maybe it's time to reevaluate kind of the structure of your nonprofit.
Well, but even to that point, Amanda, I think what a gift to be able to be involved in the process and lobby at such a high level. So yes, that's a hefty fine, the 25% tax, but compare it to what is, by statutory definition, the absolute prohibition
right on
politicking. an electing organization, in order for lobbying expenditures to jeopardize a C3 status, an electing organization has to spend amounts in excess of 150% of their permitted expenditures. And that's sort of on a rolling 3-year average. So it's not just a one-time thing. So you could have a C3 that, you know, basically is able to incentivize its supporters, its donors, the public, to give money. They're getting this charitable benefit, and they're lobbying. You know, I'm going to avoid the term substantial, but they're doing a good job lobbying.
Right. Right. Teresa, let's go on to some of the other slides, just because we do have a few other kinds of organizations other than C3s on the call. So we do want to make sure that we.
I do want to make one other comment that applies to all of them. And this is the thing.
Yep.
The term advocacy, to me, it's the right term. It's the correct definition term. But for the mindset of everyone on this call, I use the term education. And once you put it in that context and that frame of mind, you realize that there's a lot more you could be doing. Education to me is literally going up, and I like how Amanda framed it. You could have subject matter experts. You could have people, they go up and they present the tutorial on this. That type of education is, you can do an unlimited amount. That's exactly what the definition of a C3 is. It's education. You just happen to be educating on an issue that also then happens to be being considered in a legislative context. But if you, in your own mind, the mindset of advocacy, you change it to education, and doors will open for you. It's really a great thing. And I got that perspective 20 years ago from the founder of a disease organization, a very well-known one. I don't want to get into specifics, but this individual always said, I just gave away gender. This person said that they felt that organizations don't do enough education, and education is different than lobbying.
Correct. Yep. Let's talk about a few of these other questions that we've got in our question bucket here. So somebody asked, what happens when a piece of legislation is intimately tied to a specific party, where you couldn't support the legislation without implicitly supporting a specific party or even a candidate? So, and there's a similar question too, where if you have a 501c3 organization, they're issuing press releases that are directly opposing a president's policies and or actions, but not noting, they note opposition to the policies, but not referencing the election or voting. Are these unallowable activities? And I kind of think it would all matter on the manner in which you are going to be expressing your opposition. Would you agree, Dave? Like if it's coming from an educational piece of view where you say, here's the policy that's been put in place and here is how it's directly impacting the operations of our organization and how it could potentially be making funding more difficult to get, how it's making perhaps, it's creating more roadblocks when it comes to finding solutions to particular problems, that you can educate the public on those policies and how it's impacting the operations of your organization, and encouraging people to try to, find different policies or just to support or oppose that policy.
Oh, absolutely. I think the facts and circumstances are going to be vitally important. It can take a bright line yes and turn it into a clear no. And in the same vein, this whole idea of voter education, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but voters' guides, and I don't know if we're going to have the time to take a deep dive into that, but I would just mention to everyone that there is an IRS revenue ruling 78-248 that if we don't get into it, you might want to look at that, because it literally sets out 4 situations that, to me, clearly create a bright line between education on issues, and that's what a voter's guide is. You're basically saying, these members of Congress on major legislative issues in a wide range of subjects, here's how they voted, there's no editorial opinion, no context, what have you. That's voter education. That's acceptable, as opposed to if it's in a specific race, head to head, this person, that person on the two issues that are important to your organization. Again, that flips to the other side, but facts and circumstances will absolutely determine the outcome.
All right. Perfect. And let's just go on to the next slide, Teresa, if we can. So we should let you know rules are different depending on what kind of organization you are operating in. We've based a lot of our discussion here around 501c3 organizations. However, the rules are different when you're a 501c4, 5, or 6. Because more or less, being a 501c4, 5, or 6, the code would say that you are allowed to do more kind of grassroots lobbying and lobbying activities than even a C3 would. That it can really, it can't be the primary purpose for your organization, but it's going to have a lot to do with your operations. And especially in a 501c5 or C6, you're going to be more willing to get involved in the kind of activities that we've been talking about today. And then political action committees are a completely separate beast. Those are 527 organizations, and I think I'm going to let Dave talk a little bit about those.
Well, even just to back up, you know, my joke about, you know, sort of going out and socially, if people ask me at a dinner what I do for a living, if I tell them, oh, I represent, you know, charities, you know, they think, oh, how wonderful, how nice, and they want to, you know, hug me because they're thinking, you know, veterans and puppy dogs. And that's nice, but if I'm not sure if I want to really engage in a conversation, I tell people that I work, oh, for associations, and they'll be like, oh, and they'll think, oh, you know, American Medical Associations. If I want to be, you know, treated like the scourge at a party, I tell people I work for special interests. And obviously the joke is that they are all one and the same, because I believe that tax-exempt organizations do, and rightfully so, set the agenda because, as we have said now multiple times on this call, you are the subject matter experts. So obviously there are certain restrictions. We've talked about them for C3s, but for other tax-exempt organizations, you know, to the extent that you make that part of your mission, you know, lobby to your heart's desire. You know, obviously there is a tax implication. What was it, OBRA 1995 removed the ability, the tax deductibility of dues or amounts paid by your members that are attributed to lobbying, but that's a small concession. You want to lobby. Now, with that point in mind, however, because this then now flops over into the Lobbying Disclosure Act, where you have to report the amount you spend on lobbying, and that directly then impacts the tax deductibility. Some organizations inflate their number. They want to make it like they're the powerhouse. I don't say good, bad, whatever. Other organizations try to minimize that. To me, the best example of lobbying, if you're trying to minimize, is if you can directly lobby, and this is the one exception that I always highlight. If you are requested in writing to come testify before a committee, and I'm talking federal, this is a committee in Congress, you can lobby to your heart's desire. You can say, this legislation stinks. It's the worst idea. You shouldn't adopt so-and-so's proposal. You should adopt, you know, this other person. That is exempt. You know, if you were called into Congress, then, you know, that's one of the great exceptions. And even there, you start getting into how you factor, because developmental time and, you know, what you attribute to, you know, preparing for that hearing and your testimony would all then be lumped in that. So it's a little trick, or it's a way that you can, if you want to reduce your lobbying expenditure, build that in.
And the important thing too that we should let you know is, especially associations or organizations that have members that are paying dues, you should be providing on the dues statement annually what percentage of the dues paid in are attributable to lobbying activities and are non-deductible to your members. And that calculation should be done on an annual basis, would be best practice. As Dave mentioned, there are some organizations that might overestimate how much they're going to expend in these activities, and so might say to their members, 40% of the dues that you've paid in this year are non-deductible due to lobbying activities, but only really have 20% of those expenditures, you know, be actual lobbying. But it is an important thing to put on your dues notice annually. And it should not just be a stagnant calculation. It should be something that is discussed annually, would be best practice by your organization. It doesn't mean you have to change that percentage every single year, especially if you're overestimating, but there are implications to organizations that underestimate how much of their dues are attributable to lobbying. Because if you underestimate for a 2-year period, there is excess tax that you would have to pay on your on that underestimate if you're an association. So and then let's just talk about PACs really quick, because I've had a lot of questions about PACs going to this election cycle.
It's interesting. PACs are the simplest creature in the world, but they're the most misunderstood. To me, PACs are very linear. It's the only lawful way, and this is at a federal level because states have their own laws and we're not going to get that granular. But at a federal level, it's the only way that you can bundle money, raise money, and give money directly to a politician to support them. Now, just to be very clear, we've talked about, you know, supporting a politician in terms of endorsement. That was the politicking up front. There's a restriction on that. We talked about lobbying, and this is sort of that third leg of the stool. And this is financially supporting candidates. And it's money in, money out. You raise money, and you can then donate that money. And there are limitations. You can take a PAC, a federal PAC, multi-candidate federal PAC can take up to $5,000 from any one individual. And then it can give up to $5,000 to any candidate per election. Now, I emphasize that because there are 2 elections this year. There's a primary and there's a general. So even if an individual is running uncontested, you can give them $5,000 for their primary, which, you know, that's money they'll just bank, and then you can give them $5,000 for the general, and they'll use that money. This is direct support to them. Just to be very clear, for the record, this is being recorded. It is not pay to play. That is illegal. Jack Abramoff learned that. That's a joke, folks. Hopefully someone's laughing. But anyway, it's about the ability to support candidates who are ideologically or philosophically aligned with your organization and its interests. Now, there are different types of PACs. There are connected PACs. There's about 4,700 connected PACs in this country. Most of the connected PACs are connected with C6 organizations because that is permitted. And by virtue of it being a connected PAC, in the name of the PAC, it has to be the sponsoring organization. So the ABC Association PAC. And by virtue of being a connected PAC, it raises money from what's known as a restricted class, and that is its membership. And I'm not going to get into too much detail here about the restricted membership and how broad that can be, but suffice it to say, if you're an individual membership organization, you can solicit from all your members to your heart's desire. If you're a corporate membership organization, there are a lot of restrictions. You have to get a pre-authorization from the corporation. And after that, the pre-authorization allows you to solicit from specific employees of that corporate member. Now, typically C3s, not typically, C3s do not have connected PACs, but an interesting phenomenon, there are more and more non-connected PACs. And non-connected PACs are, as they're defined, sort of their own entity doing their own thing. There's now, and it's growing, but there's a little over 1,500 non-connected PACs. They're ideological PACs, and they support usually an issue. And by virtue of them not being connected to any organization, i.e. they're not controlled nor supported, their activities overseen by a sponsoring organization, they can solicit anyone. They have to, if challenged, they have to prove their independence. But I'm making this point because you could see how theoretically, even though there's a C3 organization, set up for whatever educational aspect or there's an issue, there could be a non-connected PAC that coincidentally, and I'm not winking at you when I say that, I mean it literally, coincidentally, is working to support an agenda that is very similar to what the C3s is. It does happen, and that's out there. You know, the one other, you know, the last vein of this is the Citizens United decision. A lot of people misunderstand that, misread that. A lot of people believe that Citizens United struck down the corporate money contribution to candidates. That's absolutely false. What Citizens United said, and it's based on First Amendment, is that along the lines of what I've described as a non-connected PAC, an individual can spend as much money as they want, what's known as an independent expenditure, uncoordinated with any candidate, to support an issue, to support a candidate, what have you. It can be corporate money, it can be individual money, it can be set up all sorts of different ways. But the absolute, the litmus test in all of this is that it is not coordinated. There are cases where people thought it was a super PAC, but you know, there's emails, there are communications between the campaign and all that shoots it down. Now you're under the law. There can be, you know, big fines. People can go to jail. But Citizens United made it clear that if you're an individual and you want to spend all the money you have to advance whatever your agenda is, you can do that.
And part of why we want to talk about PACs on this call is it's a unique entity in the sense that if you're not a state or local qualified PAC, if you have income over $25,000, you're required to file the Form 990. So it's solely the form that kind of is there, the reporting is on. So if you are a state or local qualified PAC, then the threshold is different. You can have up to $100,000 of receipts before you're required to file the Form 990. But it's interesting in the sense that you've got these publicly supported organizations and associations, unions that are they're all filing on the same form as somebody that's, you know, a political action committee as well. So I find them rather interesting. Let's go on to kind of some of the takeaways, because we got 5 minutes left here in our presentation. We've got a few more poll questions. We can skip them if we want to, but does anyone have a PAC associated with the organization that they work with? Okay, it looks like only a couple have yes responses. So
Maybe we should ask, do you want to have a PAC?
Yeah. Depending on how you're structured, it's a good way to operate sometimes. And then the other well, let's go to the takeaways, because we've talked a little bit about what repercussions are as we've had the discussion, that if you break the rules occasionally, there are excise taxes you could face. As Dave mentioned, in some sectors you might even face jail time for breaking the rules. So,
and again, just to be clear, that's not just under tax rules, that's the Lobbying Disclosure Act. Under the LDA, you can have up to $200,000 per incident fine or 5 years in jail. Now, rarely are those being assessed, I'll be honest with you. The largest settlement against an individual was in 2015, that was $125,000. So it's still shy of the 200K, still a lot of money though. I did poke a little fun at Jack Abramoff, but he was sentenced and served 43 months in prison. Now, the trickle down to all this is not just the Lobbying Disclosure Act, because what he ultimately was convicted of was, you know, when you start doing things like this, you're doing them illegally, you're hiding it, okay? So he was convicted for mail fraud, conspiracy to bribe public officials, and tax evasion. So it's one of those things that you're opening up a can of worms.
well, let's go to our takeaways since we only have a few minutes left. We'll skip the rest of the poll questions. So what do we want you to take away from our discussion today? Advocate for your nonprofit's mission. You, as we've said multiple times throughout the presentation, you're the content experts when it comes to your organization's purpose. You really can educate the public on what you're trying to do, on potential responses, legislation that should be introduced, solutions to the problem you are trying to fix. So advocate for your nonprofit's mission. Understand how you're structured and what you are allowed to and not allowed to do based on that designation. And then, have a nonprofit accountant and attorney that you talk to before engaging in any political activities, or if you think something could potentially cross the line into politicking, discuss that with your advisors before you do that activity. Please, before you do that activity. We generally are brought into the picture sometimes after the case, and we can't help you as much in that bucket. But if you talk about, we want to put out this opinion piece in our publication. Does it cross the line into politicking? We're happy to look at things like that and provide our opinion. And then educate your staff, volunteers, and board members on rules in an election cycle. As we've mentioned at the end of this presentation to everybody that attended, we will be sending out some IRS kind of guidelines that has specific examples in it. It's a really good resource. And I would recommend that you share that with people within your organization. And then make sure that staff, volunteer, and board member compliance is monitored, and that education continues to be an ongoing process. And I will also say that we'll send out the slides from the presentation as well. And we just got a question, do we have a slide that defines politicking? And that was one of the very first slides that we went through. So
real quick too, and I just want to throw this out there. I'd be remiss if I don't bring this up because this is more of a practical consideration. But in 2018, there was a Supreme Court decision interpreting the FEC rules, and there's always been the issue about protecting your donor list and confidentiality. But in that case, ultimately, the Supreme Court did decide, and it was with a C4 organization, but C4 must disclose their donors when funding political ads. And that's just a practical consideration. Some folks think that they can hide behind the the shield of the organization, the corporate veil as they call it. But in this case, it was held not to be true, and the disclosure was allowed. And once notified of that, sometimes donors are less inclined to participate.
And then, just some don'ts. Don't engage in any political activity prior to talking to your attorney or tax accountant, especially if you're a 501c3. And don't assume that your staff, volunteers, or board members understand how you're structured and understand the rules associated with the way you're structured. This is why education is so incredibly important. Thank you for sitting on the call today to get educated, because you're going to be able to share this information then with those in your organization. And then remember that this is probably a discussion that should be having every time we're in an election cycle. It's not just a one-time conversation. Always good to have reminders, especially when we're going into a charged presidential election. So, and the following was just some examples from the actual examples that are happening right now. And then our contact information will be here at the end, but thank you all for your time today. And if you have any questions after the fact, please just contact us and let us know.
Yes, thank you again to Amanda and Dave. This was excellent content and a great discussion surrounding this. I think we got to most of your questions, but feel free to reach out after the webinar if you have additional questions that we didn't answer. Thank you.